Welcome to Data Skeptic All About Surveys, our season about survey design, interpretation, and methodology. Let your voice be heard at survey.dataskeptic.com. Thanks to those of you who took this survey I mentioned in last week's episode where I asked about popular books on artificial intelligence. I picked 10 books from the listener write-ins, and I'm going to read those off really quick here just so you've got them. If you want the full list more slowly, go to survey.dataskeptic.com, and even though this isn't our top survey anymore, it's still live. You can find it, take it, and then see the results, or just see the list of books there. But top to bottom, Artificial Intelligence, A Guide for Thinking Humans by Melanie Mitchell. Artificial Intelligence Basics, A Non-Technical Introduction by Tom Towley. Artificial Unintelligence, How Computers Misunderstood the World by Meredith Broussard. Human Compatible by Stuart Russell. Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark. Rebooting AI, Building Artificial Intelligence We Can Trust by Gary Marcus and Ernest Davis. Superintelligence, Paths, Dangers, Strategies by Nick Bostrom. The Age of AI and Our Human Future by Kissinger Schmidt and Hutton Locker. The Myth of Artificial Intelligence, Why Computers Can't Think the Way We Do by Larson and Daniels. And lastly, The War on Normal People by Andrew Yang. On to the results. The first question I asked was, of the list below, those 10 books, which title would you recommend as the best book to learn about artificial intelligence? Pretty smooth spread across the books, but the winner, by almost double the second most popular answer, was Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom. I then asked a similar but slightly different question of the same list of 10 books, which have you read or plan to read? Of that, Superintelligence remained the most popular. Life 3.0 from Max Tegmark in second place, Human Compatible by Stuart Russell in third place, and The War on Normal People by Andrew Yang in fourth. If you didn't vote, you should have. So I've got a new question this week. 3 actually. In our quick survey of the week, you'll hear the results next week. Question number 1. Which statement best describes your belief about the emergence of artificial general intelligence? And then I list some details about if and when you think it will be achieved. I then ask you a little bit about the alignment problem, and we've got an open-ended response at the end asking you, do you support the giant pause on AI experiments? If you haven't seen that open letter, go read it, and then share your thoughts. I will read every handwritten answer. If you'd like me to share yours on the air, please note that in your feedback. But most of all, answer those first 2 questions and thoughts if you've got them on this proposed pause. That's our survey of the week at survey.dataskeptic.com. Moving right along, today's interview is with David Bourget. We're discussing the PhilPapers Survey. The PhilPapers Survey is a survey of professional philosophers. It explores a broad range of topics, and topics relevant in philosophy, of course, and takes something of a census of the distribution of current thought on the various theories and major topics in philosophy. We discuss some of those results and a lot of details about how the survey is performed. All that and more coming up next.
My name is David Bourget. I'm an associate professor in philosophy at Western University in London, Ontario. I'm also co-director of the PhilPapers Foundation and director of the Center for Digital Philosophy, which jointly operate and develop projects at the intersection of computing and philosophy, such as the PhilPapers Index.
What can you tell us more about the PhilPapers?
Well, so PhilPapers is a literature index and open access archive for philosophy that is operated as a kind of wiki, in that everyone can contribute to it, both to the index and the archive. It's a large collaborative enterprise that combines lots of automated machinery with work from hundreds of editors and thousands of other volunteers. It started as a much smaller bibliography of the philosophy of mind that the philosopher David Chalmers and I built in the early 2000s. And we progressively expanded its scope as we developed better automated methods, got more user input, and found funding to grow our team. The PhilPapers Survey that I know you want to discuss and focus on today is a companion project to PhilPapers that David Chalmers and I designed around the same time we were working on PhilPapers. To understand the survey project, its main rationale, its motivation, you have to know 2 facts about philosophy. The first fact is that philosophers disagree a lot with each other. On most central philosophical questions, we're very far from a clear consensus, or even the beginning of a consensus. You're probably familiar with debates in science, say debates around the efficacy of certain medicines. Well, philosophy is much worse. The second thing that you need to know about philosophy is that philosophical questions are highly interdependent. your views in one area are likely to influence your views in other areas and to be dependent on views in other areas. So, for example, it's difficult to study the philosophy of mind without getting into general metaphysical questions or epistemological questions. And vice versa, epistemological questions, for example, quickly lead to questions in philosophy of mind. Everything is sort of interconnected. So when you combine these facts together, you get a discipline where it's very important to have a good sense of what others are thinking about a broad range of issues. This is necessary to be able to make effective arguments that people are going to find persuasive. At the same time, though, it's very hard to do this. We don't, in general, have information about what philosophers believe. Very few philosophers are publishing their opinions. Very few have something new to add to debates, so publish their opinions. In general, the information we have about what philosophers believe is obtained sort of accidentally through conversation. So we have very little information on that, and it can be quite biased. So that's the reason why we wanted to start surveying philosophers. That's the primary reason. We wanted to make a survey like this that collected the views of philosophers on central philosophical questions.
Well, that group of philosophers, as you described, can have a lot of disagreements amongst themselves. How do you define who falls into your potential respondent category? Who are the philosophers you're trying to sample from?
So in 2009, we drew a somewhat. I should say that there were two installments of the survey. There was a 2009 version and a 2020 version. In the first version in 2009, we drew a somewhat arbitrary line. We decided to focus on philosophers who were members of departments ranked in what's called the Philosophical Gourmet Report, which is a reputation ranking of philosophy departments in the English-speaking world. This was in large part for practical reasons, because that was a faculty list that we could easily get. Also, I guess we suspected that the views of these philosophers would be of particular interest, but this was a somewhat arbitrary decision. In 2020, instead, we broadened our target to faculty members in departments around the world where there are at least 4 people publishing in English. Again, there's an arbitrary cutoff just to make it sort of possible for us to make an exhaustive list of everyone in the target population, which is what we did in both cases. And in both cases, having that list in hand, we then email everybody repeatedly if necessary to try to get good participation.
And could you share any details on the response rates? I would hope they would be higher than, if I just send out a random survey to the general population about a generic topic. This seems really on point, but I still suspect you didn't get everyone.
No, but we did get some pretty good rates. So in 2009, we had almost 50%. There was quite a lot of interest. In 2020, it was harder. It was in the middle of the pandemic, and we had a much broader population. So we got about 25% there. But still, I think, quite a good sample.
Well, I'd love to know a few details about the survey. Maybe if, for the moment, we keep our eyes on the 2009 version. For those 50% of respondents, what were they asked to do when they participated in the survey?
We had 30 questions. For each question, they had to choose one of the common views on these questions. Sometimes that amounted to a yes or no answer. For example, is there a prior knowledge? Yes or no. Sometimes there were multiple options. For example, on free will, there are different views on that, and they were presented with the 3 main views. We touched on many topics, so including a prior knowledge, free will, the nature of abstract objects, the nature of persons, skepticism about the external world, the trolley problem, the nature of truth, the relationship between mind and matter. As you can see, a very diverse range of questions spanning most of many essential questions in analytic philosophy.
So I'm aware of the trolley problem. I don't think I could articulate it off the top of my head as well as you could or a philosophy student could. And I'm sort of vaguely aware, at least I think I'm aware of most of the other things you mentioned. As a statistician, I have a notion of what a priori knowledge means, but it may be a little different from yours. If the average person on the street had taken the survey, would they have been equipped to answer these topics, or are these truly just philosopher topics?
They are specialized questions that people not having taken any philosophy courses would probably not know what to answer. That was really a specialized survey for professional philosophers, as we call them.
Well, you've got a very targeted audience. Definitely want to get the most value out of asking them something. If you're only going to decide to ask them 30 questions, how do you pick the 30?
Well, so the method there was not super scientific. We just consulted a lot of people, sort of informally. What questions should we ask? There were constraints, so we had to have questions that we can format in the right way. They couldn't have too many possible answers, for example. Basically, it was based on discussion with specialists in various areas of philosophy, but there wasn't really like an algorithm or something we can point to as a very objective way of selecting the questions.
And were there any questions for which the group had a general consensus, or were opinions pretty consistently divided?
The opinions in general are very divided. There were some questions where we had acceptance rates for one answer around 80%. In very few cases, that was the case. In general, so this, of course, is partly a product of how we constructed the survey, because we tried to ask questions that we knew would be a little bit controversial. We didn't ask trivial questions.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But at the same time, we didn't have to make a big effort for that to be the case. That all the questions people are concerned about are highly controversial.
And with the opportunity then to repeat the survey, having the wisdom of running the first iteration, what were some of the new challenges or new goals in running the follow-up?
Well, so one goal was to greatly expand the coverage of questions. We expanded to 100 questions. We also wanted to include areas of research that were not adequately represented before in the 2009 version, like research on gender and race. We also wanted to greatly expand the target population, so we include a greater variety of philosophers.
Today's podcast is supported by the University of San Francisco. At USF's Masters in Applied Economics, you can learn the skills you need to succeed in the digital economy, whether you're looking for your first job or aiming to level up in your career. You'll be studying at ground zero of the new economy, surrounded by the firms that built it and the startups that will create the next revolution. This STEM-designated master's program combines economics training with the practical skills and data analytics needed to work in the new digital economy. Students study the economics of platforms, auctions, pricing, reputation, and business strategy at the same time as they learn key tools like econometrics, causal inference, experimental design, data visualization, natural language processing, and machine learning. Students new to serious data work will have an on-ramp of courses to help them get up to speed, while those with previous background can jump directly at advanced topics. Learn more and get an application fee waiver by going to usfca.edu/skeptic. Check out the University of San Francisco at usfca.edu/skeptic. Like so many of you out there, I love Notion, our sponsor today, and I use it every day for notes, docs, and project management. It's a great tool, and I'm going to assume most of you have already tried it, because today I want to tell you about the new buzz around AI, specifically what Notion has just launched in their new incredible tool, Notion AI. Notion AI helps you work faster, write better, and think bigger, doing tasks that normally take you hours in just seconds. Everyone's aware of the recent advances in large language models, and Notion has one of the most impressive rollouts of it. They have some really cool other tools like helping you rewrite a paragraph to sound more professional or more casual or one of the labels you choose. Just tell Notion AI what to do, the more details the better. Have it write a blog post, make an outline, brainstorm ideas, or summarize a whole bunch of documents. Notion AI is an impressive choice for writing, summarizing pages, finding action items, inline translation, and whatever you need to have the IDE for running your life. You can select any text in Notion and click Ask AI. For a limited time only, try Notion AI for free when you go to notion.com/dataskeptic. That's all lowercase letters. Notion.com/dataskeptic to try out the incredible power of Notion AI today. And when you use our link, you're supporting the show. This is a limited time offer. Try Notion AI for free right now at notion.com/dataskeptic. And then in the choice to go from 30 questions to 100 questions, Hundred's a nice round number. Was there anything more to it than that? Why not 1,000 questions?
There, there isn't really a very clear motivation for 100. We just try to calibrate it to however many questions we could get away with in terms of people getting through the survey, because we didn't want to count the answers of people that didn't answer, only answer a small number of questions because of bias concerns. And in fact, the way that it was structured, not everyone had to answer 100 questions. So each participant had to answer 50, and then they could, after that, answer additional questions, which were
Hmm.
selected randomly among our bank of questions. Ideally, we would have liked to cover a lot more questions. In the future installment, I hope we can cover more questions.
Well, in the first process of expanding, I guess 30 to 100 questions, that leaves you 70 opportunities to ask new things. Because I presume you're going to ask the same 30 again. How did you decide on what new topics to include?
Yes, again, the process for selecting the new questions was not very scientific in that we didn't follow a data-oriented method for that. We just asked people for suggestions. We collected lots of suggestions, and we compiled what seemed to us to be the most fruitful suggestions.
In the follow up survey, you now have a certain overlap of questions that you asked in two different time periods. Are there any just high level observations of changes or longitudinal differences across these two measurements in time?
Well, one interesting observation about that is we found many philosophers who changed their view among philosophers who responded to both surveys. About 25% of the answers given by philosophers have changed, but we haven't found many very large changes in the aggregate. So the net differences tend to be fairly small. There is one question on which there's a significant change, the question on knowledge claims. So there is a view in philosophy that knowledge claims have different meanings depending on the context. So, for example, suppose I say, I know that you are in the United States. This is a claim that may seem true in one context, but if somebody asks, do you really know that he is in the United States? And consider the possibility that he misled you, I might end up admitting, well, I don't really know. But that doesn't seem to necessarily refute my initial claim, because there's a sense in which I did know. So there's a debate around this, about the semantics of knowledge claims, and there seems to have been a big shift in the opinions there. We measure a shift in opinions using a metric that we call swing, which is a change in relative strength between the two surveys, where relative strength is essentially the difference between the percentage of people who agree with a view and the average level of agreement for all the views on a question. We use this to factor out overall changes in level of agreements with positions between the two surveys. Based on this metric, the question on knowledge claim stands out as one on which there's been a big shift in opinion. There's a 7.3% change in swing, and this is the only one that has a very strong change. There are only 10 questions with a swing of 3% or more. So overall, positions have been relatively stable, even though 25% of answers have actually changed.
When you mentioned that those answers have changed, are those, I switched from believing in God to not believing in God? That would be a big change. Or, I switched from atheist to agnostic. That sounds like a lighter change. Do you have a sense of the nature of that change?
That's right. So I'm including here changing both from agnostic to believing and believing to disbelieving, and I'm including both. I don't unfortunately have the number for changes in definite positions or main answers, but I can tell you so that from what I've seen, that at least 50% of the changes are substantive changes from one view to another.
I think you mentioned they're kind of like a net zero change, that for every flip flopper, there's a reverse polarity, so to speak. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, more or less.
And then, in terms of the future of the project, I presume there'll be a follow up plan. Do you have any thoughts on when, where, and how that will be?
Yeah, so we have big plans for the future. Sometime this year, probably around 6 months from now, we will be launching a new website called Phil Survey, which will be an ongoing rolling survey of philosophers' views that will cover an open-ended number of questions. So for this service, philosophers will be able to submit any questions that they want people to answer. We hope this will give us a comprehensive view of where philosophers stands on basically all the central questions in philosophy. We hope also that we'll be able to sort of refine the questions to really get into the nitty-gritty of debates, and so offer a fair summary of the state of debates.
So I think having a good measurement of the different thoughts that philosophers have on a variety of topics is its own virtue. There's a good reason to this project simply to review the results. But I'm curious if you see it extending a step beyond that. Is there an interpretation we should have for these results, or some way in which we would look at this survey and inference something from it?
So it's difficult to draw inferences, say, about what is true or false, for example. Perhaps that's what you have in mind from these results, because you would have to believe that the majority of philosophers can't be wrong or something like that. We're not confident of that. At this point, we're thinking of this really as canvassing the sort of the mental states of philosophers, and not so much as revealing what is the correct view on these questions. It's really tricky to go beyond that. But I do hope that as we gather more data, especially with the Phil Survey project, and we have much more fine-grained information on what people believe, that we'll be able to sort of use techniques to extract information regarding relationships between views and start shedding light on the structure of the questions themselves and the debates using data analytics and related methods. So that's something that I'm hoping will become the case, but I think we need more data for that. We don't have sufficiently fine-grained information at this point.
Yeah, but that's a fascinating opportunity. I agree to see some, I don't know, clusters emerge inside the data, perhaps.
That's right, clusters, and there are other methods we can use to try to find out, to shed light on the relationships between ideas. Yeah.
Well, I've been to the website and we'll have it linked in the show notes. I'll put the survey2020.philpeople.org survey link in so people can go through and look through some of the results themselves. But for those that we know from our own survey, 25% of listeners are driving, so let's encourage them not to look at the survey right now. Would you give them a rough overview of the ways in which you can interact with the data?
Yes, if they go there, so they'll be able to see all the results. They'll be able to see information on longitudinal comparisons for different groups. So there are different ways of making these comparisons. The site is quite flexible for that. They can also dig into correlations between views and see contingency tables to get a sense of how views are interacting. And we are going to be posting also some additional figures in the coming days, showing, for example, new ways of clustering the data. So there's still a lot to explore there.
You'd mentioned this becoming more of an ongoing rolling survey rather than, I guess, sort of a monolith survey. Could you talk about the process for deciding to go in that direction?
For me, an important part of the motivation for expanding and in this way and developing this rolling survey is because I think we need a more efficient way of learning about the progress or the good ideas that others have come up with. It seems to me that the way that we communicate in philosophy by writing long papers and reading them, passing them around, is very inefficient and not scalable. We, at this point, way too much is getting written and published, and there's a lot of very good material out there, and we can't keep up. So I think we need to find more granular ways of transmitting information, perhaps as a first step, more fine grained and efficient ways of finding the parts of papers or the papers that we want to read that are relevant to us. So this is meant to be in part a kind of index of the literature by theses. Right now we have indexes by keywords and by authors, but I want to index the literature by views or by questions, and this is part of what this is supposed to be. So as we develop this database, it will get linked through PhilPapers publications, and it will provide sort of a new, more efficient way of finding information in the literature.
And then I guess anything else you want to mention about the future of the project? Are you looking for extra hands, or how will things evolve? Anything along those lines?
Well, yeah, you mentioned extra hands. So we're primarily philosophers and software developers. It would be a dream for us if we had collaborators who were more specialized in data science or machine learning. So if it was interested in taking a look at this and maybe helping us, then please get in touch.
There are many reasons to run a survey, but one of the good reasons is because you want to learn something. You want to measure what a population thinks. But of course, you want to do that in a not boring way. If I ask all philosophers questions I already know the answers to, it's a waste of everyone's time. In advance, do you have a sense of how predictable these answers are about what the community is going to say?
We do, because we previously ran what we call a meta survey. When we did the 2009 survey, we at the same time ran a meta survey in which we asked respondents to predict the results of the survey. These results, to me, were quite surprising because we found that people in general were pretty bad at estimating what the results of the survey would be. The mean absolute value of the error in predictions was 15%, which is quite substantial because 15% is the difference between, for example, on a question with only two possible answers, a 50-50 distribution and a 35-65 distribution. So it's the difference between an issue on which there is no consensus at all and one on which there's an emerging consensus. And we found also, in some cases, a very pronounced skew in favor of one view or another compared to the real distribution. So, for example, on a question that asked about the validity of the analytic-synthetic distinction, which is quite foundational to philosophical methodology, in my opinion, the prediction was 50-50, but the reality was 70 in favor of the distinction. So this to me was shocking. It showed like that a survey like this was urgently needed so that people have a good sense of where philosophers actually stand so that they can make more effective arguments and rely on the right premises in their argumentation.
And since we often cover topics like artificial intelligence on this show, I wanted to see if there was anything in the contents of the survey along the lines of like consciousness or these things. What sort of overlap with AI are the areas that philosophers are asking questions about?
Well, we had a question that asked about consciousness in different kinds of systems, different life forms, and different kinds of AI, today's AI and future AIs. I can give you some numbers about that. We found that 3% of philosophers believe that current AI are conscious, which to me is kind of surprising, even though low. And perhaps more surprising, we found that 39% of philosophers believe that future AI will be conscious.
That's actually lower than I was expecting, but I'm saying that as a computer scientist.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, future AI is quite open-ended. You'd think that they would be everybody should agree that there's room for consciousness there.
Unless you believe, carbon is magic or something along those lines, right?
Yes, and I don't know what people think the magic is. In general, you see, we most questions, the answers are surprising to me, as predicted by our meta survey. For most questions, I find that there's more disagreement than I would expect based on my own philosophical opinions.
Well, having already covered this result that of the meta survey that people aren't good at predicting the outcomes, maybe it would be unfair of me to ask this, but except in your personal context, perhaps. Since the last run of the survey, there have been some breakthroughs in image generation and text generation coming out of the AI world. Do you think that those results will significantly impact the answers of philosophers or their perspectives on consciousness?
Yes, I think so. I think many people, speaking mostly, I guess, from my own perspective, but I extrapolating, I think many people have a visceral reaction to ChatGPT that it really seems smart. It's very convincing at a visceral level that is probably going to affect people's opinions on the nature of mind and the nature of AI as well.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see. For listeners who want to learn more about the survey and keep up with the latest, where can they go online?
They can go to the address survey2020.philpeople.org, where we present the results in detail and provide interactive tools for exploring them.
We'll have links in the show notes. And David, is there anywhere people can follow you personally?
They can follow me on Twitter at dbourget And they can also visit my personal website at dbourget.com.
Cool. I'll have links to both of those in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share this work.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for this installment of Data Skeptic All About Surveys. Remember, I'm trying to get everyone's opinions about the current state of artificial intelligence. It'll literally take you 2 to 3 minutes, if that. Head over to survey.dataskeptic.com and share your thoughts. Tune in next week for the results.